Okay. And we're opening our meeting of the JMRL Board Policy Committee. We do, so the remote participation requirements, you're I'll have to get used to this. For a committee, we still invoke them in the same way that we would for a normal meeting, but the counter is different.
Correct.
However, we don't have anyone participating remotely right now. Right. So may or may not have someone join. Point we'll check whatever box we can check. So we can begin then with our first agenda item, which is public comment at library board meetings. We have, just a refresher, we have an existing policy. It's gotten some use recently, and there's at least one or two kind of vague spots in the existing policy. So we talked about kind of popping it open and reviewing and seeing if there's room for improvement. And this is what we have right now. My goal would be to come away from today's meeting with not necessarily a fully wordsmith document, but a set of bullet points that we as a committee agree on. This is what we want it to kind of say or cover. And then behind the scenes, one or more of us kind of work that out into a draft to look at next time. David had also collected in a folder comparable policies from other libraries in the state, I believe, and then also ones from some jurisdictional partners. And I did have, there weren't too many to look at, so that was good. It was a good amount from that standpoint. So I did kind of skim those, but I want to see if others have, and if there are some topics that stood out to you from whatever you looked at, and now's the time to put everything on the table. Floor is open.
I did look at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were just a few things that I noticed coming up over and over again that aren't in ours. I don't know that that means we have to add them, but
Right.
One of them was stating your name and place of residence.
Yeah.
And some of them had, and if you're speaking for an organization, what organization you're affiliated with.
And more, and I don't, just to dovetail onto that one before you continue, that also kind of came up with, it seemed to be an attempt, there was some others that said, we want to limit it to only people in our jurisdiction, and that was part of the point of that. So I think David maybe just put this as it's not even as much as stating names, it's as much as, do you validate residency? You know, do you validate membership in this region or not?
Or is that just a piece of information that's helpful to take into account?
Yeah.
Even if you're letting people speak from outside.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we have been asking, I believe on the sign-up sheet that we've been using this summer, we've been asking people for their name and also where they're from, but we're not asking them to state it, which a lot of our jurisdictions will do.
But they're stating, and then there's also, do you require them to put it on the sign-up sheet as a condition of even being able to participate? And so I'm not saying pro or con right now. I don't think Camille is either necessarily, but she's pointing it out that that's.
My experience with our local government partners has been that they all ask and they make it clear, you know, if you're one jurisdiction, you're going to get more weight to, so if there's some amount of like, we can't listen to everybody, they're going to give more weight to the people that live in their jurisdiction, but they wouldn't tell somebody you can't comment. I don't know how that has been adjusted to accommodate for electronic commenting.
Okay, thank you. Keep going, please.
There were several that had rules about whether or not you could concede your allotted time to someone else.
Yeah, I caught, because that has come up in a couple of our meetings recently. There's an open question in people's mind. They assume you can or you can't. So great. Yeah.
And then we have, I think, a time limit for each person, but not an overall time limit as far as like how long the total comment period can go.
In terms of time limits, I was seeing commonly either 3 or 5.
Yeah.
So we could put 3 versus not 5 per speaker.
The question of whether people are allowed to speak more than once in the same period or in the same meeting. Oh, and then the other thing, one was, a couple of them had a process for requesting that items be added to the agenda of the meeting in advance, like the public requesting that items be added to the agenda of the meeting. And then several of them had like a caveat in there, like no political statements and then a bunch of other stuff, but no political statements kept coming up.
Yeah, and personnel was another.
Right.
Um,
We have that
Personnel.
in the last paragraph, I think. What I,
Adding items to the agenda seems, I don't remember seeing that, so I'm glad you brought it up. That seems like a different topic to me.
right, it's not a comment, it's like a request that.
But I guess it's more like how, like Mike always says, you want the document to point people to how they do go do something.
Right.
So rather than have somebody stand up here and say, I want the board to discuss X issue, it would be, here's how you would request that the board discuss.
Yeah, or even like it's two avenues, like maybe the group who wanted to do name change, they had instructions for like, I want to add the agenda. That could be to the advantage of the board to know ahead of time that like this be discussed versus just popping up in public comment.
And then more than once in a comment period or meeting, I see this all the time in our local governments where they'll have like an open kind of public comment, and then they'll have something specific to a public hearing that they're holding. So I'm guessing that's where that comes from. We're talking those two separate. So if we were to have a board meeting in which we were to discuss, you know, building a new library on Pantops or whatnot, we could have a public comment period and then a separate public hearing during the board meeting. So somebody could make two comments. And sometimes you'll hear them say, like in city council meetings, like, oh, actually, you need to save that comment for the hearing on that topic.
Not really did.
And not really done. But our policy here does say that we would do a public hearing, and we have a separate, do we have a separate public
Yeah.
hearing
Yeah, there is.
policy?
So I guess I would add that to these bullet points while what's the threshold, or how do you, is there anything in the regular public comment process that defines that we must have I think that would be tied together with an overall time limit probably.
And how do you somehow identify that the comment is about one thing that they're related?
Sure. Although in practice, I think if people are showing up,
I agree.
there's substance. Okay, other things, Camille, or?
That was mostly, I mean, there was some stuff about whether like people there can make noise, applause, boo, whatever, or whether you can have signs at the meeting. I don't know that that's applicable to.
Well, I did like to sign, I would put that as a bullet point, because I did like the point that Albemarle was making is you can have signs, but you can't obstruct people. And they also said you can't have sticks or poles on your signs.
Yeah.
And we did have someone with a sign the one time that it blocked the people.
Okay.
I believe Tony asked them to move,
Yeah,
just
to
politely
the back of
asked.
the-
It wasn't a rule. He was like, hey, can you do it? So.
Right, so do you need a rule? I mean, again, this is the brainstorm list, you know, we're gonna have to make decisions about whether it's necessary or beneficial to be super detailed about every single one. I guess I would throw on the concept of advanced signups. Especially if you get to where there's a limited number of slots, that incentivizes sort of a jockeying to sign up and maybe get all your friends to sign up to starve out the other team and that sort of thing. I think that merits some thought, you know.
I added one too about in person versus online. You make a distinction. Is there a difference in terms of what gets weighted?
Okay, and online you mean sort of real time remote, maybe remote is.
Remote participation.
Do we have does the current say anything about if you want to ask the director to read something but you're not there personally? It does not, although I feel like that has happened.
It
have
has,
done
yeah.
I think it seems reasonable to me generally. All right. I think the biggest question here, and for me, the highest priority in the sense that it's the part that's open loophole right now, is do we place a time limit, and do you have 3 versus 5 minutes? And how is that defined? To me, I've sort of been people in the room that have been around for 10 or 20 years. I've sort of been paying attention to board library meetings for 8 years or so, and kind of only come up twice. It's kind of every 5 years, it seems to me, where it's enough of an issue that, it's an inconvenience. So to me, personally, I'm willing to every 5 years sit for an hour and a half instead of 40 minutes to err on the side of allowing people to participate. The day of, some people are going to be salty. It's like, this is a lot to sit through. But yeah, I'm open to other.
But wouldn't we then hopefully, like if we have to do this over again, wouldn't we then say we're going to have, if all the comments about the name change, for
Yeah,
instance,
let's have a public
then we
hearing.
just say, you know what, we're going to have a public hearing. We didn't know that this time around because but we've had the issue with the child here. We've had the case, obviously, and we've had this. These are the 3 that I recall in 27 years.
So I think that goes to the line that Mike was talking about between the overall time limit and the public hearing threshold.
Yeah.
I agree with you in general. If people are going to make the time to get here during the middle of the day to let the library board know something, then I don't want to say no to anybody as long as it's possible for the library board to then still hold its meeting and get its business done.
Yeah.
So I think we could put a time limit, but it could be like
Discretionary.
90 minutes. It could be a long period. Now, if it has a half an hour for public comment, we have no idea at this point how much public comment we're going to get in. So I don't know. To your point, Krista, it would be great to have some sort of mechanism in place in this policy that's like, okay, in advance, we're aware that this needs to be instead no public hearing.
I guess if you required signups,
In advance.
then you would know in advance.
Yeah.
But again, that's an
Yeah.
an obstacle. It's a barrier for some people.
And that varies from our jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some of them you have to sign up in advance, but they have some open slots there. So if you just show up without signing up in advance, you run the risk of not being able to comment. But in theory, that's a known policy. So people know if they really want to be heard, they should sign up in advance.
Yeah, I just didn't, there was at one of the meetings where we had a lot of people that I think there was a little organized effort, and there was, hey, show up 90 minutes early so you can get on the sign up list.
Yeah.
I don't love that, a structure that incentivizes that sort of
Early bird.
gamesmanship. I think
I think city council used to have the opportunity where you could sign up in advance with the clerk. Like with Paige, you could go and sign up in advance, so she'd have an idea
I think some of them also do that, we'll reopen public comment
at the end.
Just we'll get to this period.
Yeah.
And then if people are still interested, and I would say at that point, you would want no duplicates to that public comment.
Yeah.
If there's anybody who didn't get to speak, sat through the whole meeting,
Yeah.
then bless their heart.
Yeah, I kind of like that. And that would make me more comfortable at saying it's an hour up front. An hour up front and 90 minutes on the back end.
Well, Mike, can we maybe put a pin in that for a second? Look at the other ones that we want to have some decisions on before somebody goes wordsmithing here.
Yeah.
And then we can come back and see if we have a recommendation there. So stating name and or residency, I'm a big thumbs up on that.
Well, so the question is it a precondition for you to be able to participate?
I don't think it should be. I think that adds a barrier. Like, what if you don't have good proof where you live or something like that, but you still want to make a public comment? Like, you can say I live, whatever. I mean, what if you're unhoused?
Right. Well, we're not asking you to provide an address. I wouldn't think. I would want to know that you're in the service area and which jurisdiction you're.
Yeah. But not like we want you to prove it and you can't talk if you don't, right?
We had quite a few people that were not in the jurisdiction at all that were.
Yeah, we
speaking.
wouldn't, I don't think we would stop them
Right,
from
but
talking.
it's just good to know. Like if they're coming from within or without.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it weighs a little bit. I know one of our jurisdictions does this quite a bit, and it weighs more to me if somebody is in the service area and is a user of the services than if somebody is on the outside looking in and doesn't actually get the benefits of the services.
Yeah, it's useful context, I certainly agree. So I think we would want to phrase it in that way that it's sort of an optional or a requested.
So mostly, does everybody agree we're mostly interested in what JMRL jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Service jurisdiction, yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. If it's somebody from outside, we should still be allowed to talk, but it's helpful to know.
Okay, can you concede time to others? I think it just gets complicated.
I would say no, yeah. But I think it is worth, so first of all, we don't have to include every one of these in the final product. I think this is worth including just because I've seen it, there's some
Thoughts on that?
vagueness on it.
I think that goes together with the like signing up ahead or not, because like if people I know in groups who are organizing, right, will like a bunch of them will go and take slots, sign up, and then with the intention of like
Getting their
meeting
time.
time to so-and-so when they get up there.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on how you want the whole thing structured, whether that's an issue or not.
I don't want to have to police that during.
Yeah,
the
it gets
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah.
I've noticed that at city council meetings, it gets confusing. And frequently it's not a lot of new content because it's an organized.
So this would be for somebody who felt that the 3 minutes was not enough time for them to get their point across. Because we're not talking about groups, a group could come in and send 10 individuals
Yeah.
to speak. We're talking about individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, the example I recall recently was, I think there was one representative of a position that had a very detailed, presentation to make, and it wouldn't fit. So his sort of colleague said, well, I want to turn this into a 10-minute slot by exceeding my time. I would just, I think that the 5-minute or 3 there's a reason for that, and get your point across. So yeah, I would just say, I would be in favor of including this, in a gentle, simple statement, and just put it, but I would also be in favor of clarifying no.
Yeah, I remember, right, the scenario was somebody needed an introduction, so it was like an author of some sort, so that they wanted somebody else to introduce them, but then that person also had their own personal comment. Yeah, so there were ways that they could do that, I think, but not then come back and make a personal comment.
Okay.
Okay, and overall, let's skip these two. So 3 versus 5 minutes. What I didn't do that I meant to do was to chart all of the peer libraries that answered in our jurisdictions.
My vague impression is it's kind of half and half. There was more 5 than I was a little surprised at.
And how many were?
More 5 than I kind of expected. So I forget if I already shared this publicly or not. I know it's a conversation with David probably, or maybe others, but this did come up 6 or 7 years ago. Policy committee did kind of make a stab at switching from 5 to 3. And when it got to the main meeting, the arguments for and against was, well, 3-minute requires you to kind of put together your argument in a more concise and effective way. And then the counter, thought when it got to the full board was, well, but we don't want to, not everyone, you shouldn't have to have that skill set in order to, kind of show up and be able to present what you have to say. So I think I personally am more on that second side of things, although I would like to see us procedurally be a little more consistent or obvious with that we had at the Board of Supervisors. There's the green, yellow, red clock or whatever. because I think in practice, what happens is you want to be polite and let them finish. And then only when they kind of, it's 7 minutes and they're obviously rambling or repeating, then you kind of have it, you're like, okay, it's enough. So, if there's some sort of automated or obvious system, then that makes it clear that you're just applying that consistency.
Yeah, yeah, we do move the meetings around, so it wouldn't have to be a solution in all of our meeting rooms. But I wonder if it's just as simple as put up a web page with a timer on it right here.
Side, like a,
Yeah.
minimize
some-
it,
Some
yeah.
widget on the computer
yeah,
that it's.
there's probably something like
Of
that.
course, right now I can't even get these folders to open, so I don't know what's going on.
If you're moving around, it can be a physical gadget that you.
Like a chess clock.
I can't open that one. Jeez. It's getting worse.
One more thing to carry around for sure.
Okay.
But please,
So,
what's your
yeah,
other?
anybody else? 3 versus 5.
I'm okay with 5. I feel like it doesn't come up that often.
Yeah.
So when it does come up, we can tolerate the 2 extra minutes.
Yeah, it's 5 is
It's just me on the remote. I think 5 is more patron friendly for sure. So, and I don't want to limit the public's ability to give their 2 cents to this public venture. So idealistically, maybe 5. Practically, I like
What you
3.
can. How long do the attention spans?
So Mike, you were more on the 5 minutes?
I think so. I mean, you could always say 4, which
I was about to say.
no one else does, but
I'd rather be somewhere in line with some of our peers. Can you speak more than once in a comment period or a meeting? So I would say not in a comment period, but if the meeting has a separate public hearing, then yes, a separate.
I don't think that ever happens though.
Like, if you have a public hearing, is it usually part of or with the board meeting, or
I've
would that
never
be a
been
separate
part of a
event?
JMRL public hearing.
I've never seen it either, but my recollection of the policy, which does exist, is that if we think there's a topic of interest, we will set up a separate meeting just for that. I don't think we've ever had in a board business meeting had 2,
And both.
had more than one period for, public comment on topics. I think this, the topic of the hearing will be clearly stated.
That says 5 minutes, so it's consistent.
It doesn't just devil's advocate, it doesn't have to be because one is part of there's a business meeting that has to happen the same day, and this would be the time to stretch out for a focused attention on topic.
Here's a 2-hour
2-hour
limit.
limit,
Yeah. So this pretty clearly to me reads as a separate thing.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to have a public hearing, the board would call a separate meeting.
I don't think it's necessarily, I think the answer would be no, but I also don't think it's necessary to include as a bullet.
I mean, I could see if you were gonna do the thing where you had comments at the beginning, comments at the end, that maybe some of the
Yes.
discussion the board had, someone might have a response to that they
Yeah.
then feel the need to share.
Yeah,
But I
agree.
mean,
That's
Yeah.
a good point. You would want to clarify if you're doing more.
So I think I feel pretty strongly that we wouldn't, the board has been instructed not to have a back and forth engagement with the public here. I'd also like to limit the public's back and forth engagement with each other. I think that's important context for the board, but I don't know that the business meeting of the library board is the forum for that. So I could see a situation where it's like, okay, somebody gets up, they make a comment. Somebody else gets up, they make a comment. Person A wants to respond to that comment. Person B wants to respond to that. And if they're the only 2 people here, are we caught in a loop there?
Yeah, but so certainly we don't want that, in my opinion. The question is it already just kind of clear from context? Or does it need to be spelled out? We can spell it out. I mean,
I would vote that we would say, and we could leave it open, say in a comment period, so if there was if there was later more public comment, then maybe we could.
but I don't want to incentivize person B to stick around until, the second period at the end in the expectation that that's a rebuttal time. It's overflow time, it's not rebuttal time.
I'd be interested in looking into one.
Yeah.
And providing some other methods for you to look at information to the library board. And I think this is so much easier than when a lot of these policies were written. Like now they can send me something or they can email the entire board.
I think it's a good bullet point, which is to add is other methods to submit. But it doesn't even, I would even say it doesn't have to be the board. I mean, it might be, again, someone who just walks in the front door and checks out books every so often, might not realize that there's a director and what their role is and what the board's in charge of. They just want to talk, they just want to get their message to whoever's in charge. So a reference back to the suggestions policy, I think wouldn't hurt here as an educational link.
So for the previous bullet point, can you speak more than once in a comment period or meeting? I think I would lean towards saying no one time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's clear. The question in my mind was,
Whether or not
does
it
it
is.
need to be stated explicitly?
How about adding items to the agenda?
That might not be relevant.
I would,
I think that if you want items added to the agenda, you would contact the board members. The board sets the agenda, not the public.
That's what the policy that I saw, or the couple of policies had in there. It was like, you need to contact the board X number of days before the meeting or whatever. You have some issue you feel.
And there's no guarantee there that the board would then choose to add that
But yeah,
as an agenda item for board discussion.
Yeah.
They might respond and say, actually, this is more appropriate as a public comment.
Honestly, I would just leave that out.
yeah, I don't, yeah.
So we've already got something about personnel speech, isn't that right?
Yeah,
very performance of specific employees.
So I understand the purpose of that. It was like they don't want the board, the policy committee at the time didn't want somebody to come because of their personal complaint against, one employee of the library system. To me, that's a very different thing than political speech. And I don't know.
I don't know, they
what
cross
is-
over sometimes.
Well, but I just don't know how you would define political speech. We've had elected officials come in here that are running for an office that are speaking about a particular library issue. And I wouldn't consider that to be political speech, but here it is.
Politician speaking,
on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I honestly was surprised I was even in there because of that issue. Like, who is deciding what is and isn't the political
Right.
speech?
And at what point do you decide your 3 paragraph, you're 90 seconds into your presentation? Oh, wait, we have to gong you off.
Yeah.
I am pretty skeptical about the content-based, decisions being made here.
Yeah, and having to make them on the spot while someone's talking is
Yeah.
not.
I mean, I think it's mostly covered, and we should probably talk about this. The orderly conduct of the meeting shall rule on the appropriateness of speakers' presentations in light of the purpose of public comment period. So I think it's that.
Yeah.
Right? Like if somebody comes in and their speech is disruptive to the library or the library board's meeting, regardless of whether it's about personnel or politics or the moon landing or whatever, then the chair has the authority to say, okay, we're going to cut this.
But if I'm the guy being cut, I'm going to want to know what you told me in advance about why you cut me.
It's going to be the
That sentence by
orderly,
itself
the
is.
orderly conduct of the meeting. I think that
Yeah,
leaves.
if you told me it's inappropriate, I'm going to say according to what definition?
Yeah, we had people in here with a Black Lives Matter sign. Some people would call that a political sign.
Yeah, I don't think, so I'm going to remove this political or personnel speech, right? But maybe we'll add that line here as just, we want to talk about how to,
Yeah, disruptive and orderly.
how to define that, or we want to give the chair enough leniency here, but also make it clear to the public in advance what the standards would be. And I would think about it as very similar to our conduct policy, where the conduct, remember we added this a few years ago, if it's disruptive to others' use of the library, so it would be something along those lines. Like, and I kind of feel like orderly conduct of the meeting is already covering that.
I'm even a little skeptical about the personnel restrictions.
About what's already there or about adding more?
No, about what's already there.
Is that like an HR issue though? No.
I don't know, like, I would be okay if somebody came in here and they were like, we are upset about the way this library is being run. Similar to your point about like, who do we talk to, who's in charge, right?
Yeah.
And I'm okay with somebody coming in and talking about me as the director and the ultimate authority for the staff, you know? I wouldn't be okay with somebody coming in and talking about, you know, an individual frontline circ employee that they.
But we did have that a couple of
We
years
have
ago.
it. I can talk about my experience.
I suppose that was in violation of what's written there right
We
now.
also had people from the public talking about me personally on the radio. Of course, that's
not in
separate from
public
this.
comment, right.
But again, it was, you know,
And I don't remember all those, okay. Even when we had, you know, we had people showing up because they were upset about an interaction between a staff member and a member of a family. It wasn't, they weren't naming the staff member. There wasn't talk about like this person. It was about like, what is the library going to do? What are your policies and what are your procedures that are going to make sure that this is a welcoming environment? So to me that, you know, it's a fine line maybe, Mike, but.
So I wonder if this sort of language is there can be adapted to direct that focus on a little bit. I'm just a little worried about as soon as this interaction gets invoked, I'm just speaking hypothetically about a hypothetical. Someone says, oh, we got to stop you right there. Can't talk about it because it involves a person. Because I kind of have seen that as well. I think it can go too far in that direction.
I mean, could there be something about like, can't identify an individual staff member like in the public?
That's fine. It was in the Daily Progress, it was on the radio, and it was in this room.
This is for,
I know.
in this room.
Yeah, and then like, you know, the board could seek more information from that person. I don't know, but I guess that has to be public, right? Then.
No, the board can have, the board shouldn't be discussing individual personnel
Right.
issues except for in closed session.
Right. So
it
if, like
would
I
not be a
came
public.
and I was like, I went to the front desk at Gordon Avenue Library and this person like didn't offer me equal service and they were so rude and they were awful and I need the library board to know about it. Like, saying that person's name in that context seemed like the problem to me.
Yeah.
If I came and I said that without their name and the library board was like, whoa, David, you need to check into this, like, then you go and follow up with that.
Yeah,
right?
no, I hear the points here.
Yeah,
My only concern would be, you know, whether or not somebody would be identifiable just by the fact that like, you know, if it's a complaint about
Depends. If
the
there's one
bookmobile
person in
drive,
that
correct?
position,
Somebody driving the
Right.
book, it's like, okay.
Relationship. Sometimes it's pretty narrow.
But I will say, Chris, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the parts of your experience that you're describing. There is a difference to somebody who's in charge. I mean, just similarly,
Different responsibility.
it was somebody. If David is saying, if somebody's saying, hey, the director is doing it wrong,
He's running this thing into the
that's
ground.
kind of okay. In this case, it was, hey, the branch manager claim didn't do the right thing. I
mean, that should still be coming to me. You know, it's my responsibility to then go to Camille and say, what is going on here? We need to correct this.
Right. So but there's, again, we're talking about people who don't, you know, interact with the operational library in that way.
Right.
So there's education need there.
maybe you add something to you can't talk about personnel issues that says this is how you address that. This is where you correct that.
Well, it does say that already. Comments.
Right.
Yeah, this might be worth just some
Talking through.
thinking through. I I think do we agree that the public should be able to, if there are interactions that they felt were a problem, they need to have a way to bring that up.
So in the
The
past,
question
yeah.
is, what's the right way for them to do that?
Right, and we certainly have had, like if somebody's unhappy with service or an interaction they had, we've had people reach out because to your point, the public doesn't know what the rules are, whatnot, and sometimes they're gonna go to, I wrote the governor or I wrote the president about this, right? So there are certainly mechanisms out there. The question is whether or not public comment is the place for them. And I would think that yes, like that this is the public's chance to stand up in front of the library board and say, here's my experience, and you're in charge of the governance here, so you should know about this. But I don't want to put library staff's individual personnel issues up in front for a public discussion about. That would be a closed session of the board in which that member of the public would not be, unless the board asked them to come, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think I agree with all the articulation of the trade-off that you just described. It's just how do you?
And a sentence or two.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's along the lines of what Camille was saying. It's like naming people individually.
Identifiable information. I don't know, because like you were saying, yeah, it depends on the context, whether it's obvious who it is or not.
Okay,
All right.
that's something to think about. Is it worth putting something about signs? It goes back to the same principle that we're talking about, which is you should not disrupt the other participants' ability to, take part in what's going on.
I think maybe there could be something in the reworking of this first sentence of the last paragraph that would say, maybe some concrete examples there for people to know, like this, the chair would consider this to be disruption.
Yeah, because you don't want somebody to come back and say, well, I have my Black Lives Matter sign and I got asked to take that out, but I saw somebody the other day and they had their whatever sign and they didn't get asked to take that out, and they said it was because this wasn't orderly, whatever,
I think putting a few examples there, so signs could be one of those, interrupting others while they're speaking.
Oh, there was some of that going on. Well, some of the comments, people reacted to the comments in a vocal, an audible
I
way.
don't know, we don't have the capacity, I think, we did get public comment from some people that go to Albemarle board meetings, and they didn't like the fact that there was noise in the room. I don't know how much capacity we have to regulate that, basically.
Well, so Albemarle was the one I saw that had kind of some specific language for that. It said you should raise your hand as a show of support. I suppose that talking about orderly conduct, you would include some statement about, audible reactions.
You can take a look at what Listen in the County do. So I would think that it would be fair to use that as one of the examples of here's the type of thing that would get in somebody else's way. Okay, signing up in advance. So I think there just needs to be some, like, how do you do that?
if you want.
Well, do we?
Do we want to allow that? I mean, currently there's nothing in
Require
here.
it. Yeah. You're requested to pre-register.
It doesn't say.
But I don't
what
think-
that means.
I don't think I'm hearing in the room that we want to just close. You have to sign up in advance, and otherwise, and then there's a certain number of slots. Although if we were saying 1 hour, if we're saying 1 hour and maybe another hour, so it's 2, then that's 24 max. Although some people might not take the whole time, so I guess you could.
Right, we don't name the number of slots, right?
Well, I mean,
By
now
the
it's gonna
time
be
we
with-
do,
right.
but like you're saying, it could be, some people won't take the full time.
So is there a concern that by leaving some language similar to number 3 right here, but being more specific about it, like here's how you would contact the director to sign up in advance. Is there a concern similar to the earlier concern I heard about people taking advantage of that and trying to fill up all the slots? Do we need to try to regulate that? We're way out on a limb here.
Yeah, well, I don't feel like it has been happening.
I have gotten a few requests for, I want to make sure that I'm able to speak electronically, or somebody has emailed me and said, I'm going to be on Zoom. Will you make sure that I get that?
I think the point of this from a participant standpoint was, hey, I'm going to make the effort to make sure I get a chance rather than showing up the day of and having to potentially compete if there's with other spots. So, I think on balance, that's probably good because it also gives you the advance notice of what, it benefits you to know in advance what kind of signups you have. So I think I'm just talking out this stream of consciousness here, but I think if there's a process where, if we're saying it's an hour limit, and your sign up in advance, we'll go from the advanced signups first. We'll go in order, and then when we get to the hour, that's when you kick back to the overflow period. It's okay. Just because I haven't seen the gamesmanship happening, but I think the difference is number of slots versus the time. Okay, so I could have 100 signups, but if 90 of them don't show up, they weren't able to starve out the last 10 people because there was still time left. I think that's what makes it work.
Well, I think that dovetails into the next question about in-person versus remote comments. So what we have been doing is allowing the room to speak first and then allowing the remote commenters to speak. So, if somebody is signed up in advance with me and they're going to be there remotely, are we going to then bump them to the top of the list? Or are we going to do some remote, then in person, and then the rest of the remote?
I guess it's just a little, because you could literally, I would say, well, the first two are in person, you go in order, and then the third one happens remote, you switch over there, and
It doesn't matter. And you're
now, as just a logistical, I guess there's some messing around with the screen and so forth. It's your turn. Can you raise your hand? We're going to promote you.
right.
If that's too much overhead, that would be the only reason to not just go strictly in order, in my mind.
I think we definitely want to allow people that are attending remotely, participating remotely to speak, right? So let's just get some language in there, because right now there's nothing that says you can do that.
Right.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't want that to have the effect of requiring the library to hold a hybrid meeting every time. I think that's probably our intent going forward.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want that to be required just because, the public comment says we promise you that you'll have a remote option.
Well, not even a hybrid meeting. All of our meetings, even if it was an entirely in-person meeting, we would still allow public comment from the outside. We would still be recording it. It would still be a Zoom session, and we would still be allowing public comment in that fashion.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You just said it would always be a Zoom session, and probably, like I said, that's probably the intent in reality. But there's nowhere are we required to do that right now. And if you added it here, now there would be a place that required you to do that.
So,
And there,
language making it clear that this is an option when it is an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point about that. We're not nothing in the remote participation policy requires that, but I don't see going backwards.
Yeah, I agree.
But there could be a glitch with technology or whatever that would
Yeah, I
cause
think
you
we're
not to
about
be
to have
able
one.
to.
We had one during the technology committee meeting.
How appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. Glitched out halfway through. And then submitting comments in advance, I think that's kind of similar, that we just want to have language that makes it clear that if you want something read in as a public comment, we would allow that. Then now it's kind of the same issue that we're starting with, is how much do we want to try to regulate what we would see as somebody's attempt to over game the system in order to get, you know, a lot of public comment in, basically.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about someone really trying to overgame the library's public comment, like it's gonna come up, yeah.
Well, you know what I
I
would
know,
say,
I know
this is
what
what I
you
would say about our own, you know, the library regulations, that I don't want to be regulated for the like 0.1% of people who are
That
trying
one
to get
person.
one. We want to give everybody.
Once
the
every
benefit
10
of the doubt.
years, yeah.
And assume the best.
Yeah.
All right, so I heard a synthesis from you, Mike, of what, like for the third and fourth bullet points here for what this could look like an hour, we'll cut everything at an hour and then add a public comment at the end of that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I think that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, and then like you
To
said,
start from
somebody's
something.
really willing to stick around.
Oh, we see that at city council where.
Yep. Yeah, there's like one lone commenter left, cleaning the conscience.
So at the back end, 30 minutes, an hour, 45 minutes.
I have a feeling the full board's gonna weigh in, gonna wanna weigh in on a lot of this, so. I wanna
Sure.
make sure.
Yeah.
But we're,
We wanna give them some more. And then what about triggering a public hearing? When I read that, it has more to do with the library knowing ahead of time. I think so it would be something like the name change issue where we probably,
Hindsight.
in hindsight, should have triggered a public hearing, or it would be like a construction project or a big change in service or loss of service or something.
well, there may still be a public hearing with the name change.
Yeah, that could still happen,
The process hasn't been
Right.
defined yet.
But I think, yeah,
Given this, I would not put a threshold into this policy.
I think I agree with that.
I would not put a defined threshold, because again, the only way you would know is if you get 50 signups in advance. If it's just you show up one day and there's a bunch of people in the lobby, it's too late to say, oh, you got to go home because we're going to do a public hearing instead. I would not want to.
Require a 3-day notification,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Not that it says that in our policies, but I'm pretty sure that would be. I feel like this is a good place
Yeah.
where we could try to wordsmith this.
I just don't want it to get too complicated. But I feel like I think the discussion is good. Okay. Can we leave it here, and one or more of us will be tapped as volunteers to do some synthesis?
Since Jenny's not here. I nominate Jenny.
Okay, we have 20 minutes remaining, which is not gonna be enough time to get through everything that we wanted to.
Really, we only have until the quarter of.
Yeah, then we have 7 minutes. My hope was to try and make the long-awaited reorg happen next month. Maybe that's not gonna be realistic.
December, next meeting.
Yeah, that's ribbon. So maybe we can let's pop up in the policy, the ethics topic, which is next on the agenda anyways. And at least try and get some of this on the table. So I'm gonna take a stab at this, and Davis can probably have to clean it up a little bit. There are existing policies, the Public Employees Code of Ethics and the library, what's the exact title?
Library employees go to that.
Employees Code of Ethics. Those have been part of the manual. They've been reviewed last, I think 11 years ago. We knew that they were up for review, but we wanted to, as part of the handbook effort, there was an open question of, well, do these just move into the employee handbook and they're deprecated as policies? The way things landed actually worked out in the employee handbook, which is not to say it can't change again. The employee handbook does have a mention of, hey, you're by these codes of ethics, and it just refers back to these policy level policies. The two codes of ethics are adapted from some version in the past of City of Charlottesville personnel policies. There's not something today that looks a lot like what this looks like now. And then the library employees code of ethics is adapted from the ALA. There is an ALA statement which does look similar, you know, in scope and format to what's here. So there's a couple directions we can go. One question one thing I was thinking about just today and yesterday, I wonder if peer libraries even have these at all. I think our policy manual is a fair bit more detailed than a lot of places. So do we even need them at all? You know, what is their purpose? And if we do, and do we need two or one? You know, can they be combined somehow? How closely should or must we follow these other organizations with whatever bullet points we want to include? So general, I always like to start on what's the premise is, what's the point of this, and what's the benefit, and I'm not saying there's not. I like to be able to articulate that up front and then go from there.
I think that's a good question about whether or not our peers have these. And I think that the distinction to me between the two of them is one is dealing with just general government employees, codes of ethics, and it's very detailed about like accepting gifts and,
Yeah.
and you know.
Now, if imagine,
There was somebody trying to give me cash the other day
It does
because she
come
was
up.
so grateful that I
It
was
does
helping her.
It comes
So.
up with some regularity. Having
Yeah.
said that, so this particular document that JMRL uses, the library, no, not this one, the other one, the Public Employees Code of Ethics is based on a deprecated handbook that the city used, which synthesized their previous personnel policies from the early aughts, which have now been redone. And we've only had these for a week or so, and it's a 270-page document of which I shared 3 pages. You know, a lot of these things are covered in those policies, and our policies basically say we follow those unless it's spelled out directly that we use JMRL.
so if we deprecated this document,
Yeah.
it would still be covered by whatever.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not in a nice bullet list, but somewhere in the 250-page
Yeah,
document.
so at that point, you would, I think you do want, for the feasibility of just employees' experience, they need to have the bullet, you know, the salient bullet points kind of. So that would either be in a policy or at that point you put it in.
And to Camille's point, it comes up all the time that around the holidays, especially, like somebody will come in and want to give, they'll want to express their appreciation for library staff and give cash.
Get
You know,
2 individual people.
Yeah.
What if someone brings lunch or cupcakes?
That's okay.
Yeah.
So it's very well spelled out in the new policies that, you know, a non-transferable gift of some sort, like food, within reason, you know, not like here's an all expense paid trip to, you know, I don't know where you can see.
Okay, so I think we're agreed that our employees need a simplified.
Yeah.
We don't need to ask them to read a 270-page document and pull out of it. So does that belong, in our opinion, in a policy, or is it a policy which, yeah, in some sense, I think this is I'm talking myself into, this is functioning like the employee handbook, which we didn't have at the time, by highlighting things from the source document, which is what we're working from. So is that the right approach, or do we just do that, but in the employee handbook?
Do you want the public to
No.
know what our
Right.
code of ethics.
Okay, great point. Yeah.
They don't see the handbook.
Although it's available to them.
Yeah,
in
but
the
it's-
sense that
right.
all of
Yeah.
that, it's all right. It's not, they could ask for it. and we-
Right.
Yeah, but
It's
the-
not out there.
But the policy manual is a great point. The stuff we're telling the public, here's what we want you to kind of know up front. So. Yeah, I think that's a good argument in favor of.
I also think that it's a fine line that we've discussed many times, but the policies are board level decisions. Once it gets to the handbook, then, we're seeking board, we want the board, what was the word we used?
Endorse.
Endorse the handbook, but the handbook is a procedural administrative document. So if there are things that the board would want to make sure get included there, then it had best remain at the policy level. I think either way, we're gonna have to come up with a bullet list, and then we could have a greater discussion about where it goes. So I think it would be a good homework assignment for somebody to look at what's in the current code of ethics, look at that ethics section in the, oh jeez, I lost it.
The cities.
In the city's new manual and see if any changes have been made, if anything is different, if anything. Both Mike and I are looking at you.
I already started highlighting. I can do that, that's fine.
Okay, so this is for specifically the public employees code of
Yeah.
ethics, basically look
Yeah.
to see if there's any difference between the new city's documents.
Yeah.
And I can share the whole, the city just released this last week, but I believe at this point it has been, I don't know if the word is endorsed or seen by city council, so I think that it's a shareable doc now. I just need to double check that with HR. I can send you the whole 250 pages.
Very exciting. Okay,
It is they did a really nice job.
that's good.
Okay, that's one of them. And then there's the ALA one, which has changed since the last time JMRL adopted this. And I do think it's interesting that there was this kind of mediation, that it wasn't just wholesale, like, oh, we're going to take what ALA has. There was some attempt, and I don't know if it was to make it match the other one or in the language that got used or what the decision was 20 years ago. That instead of just saying somewhere, JMRL adopts the ALA code of ethics, we went through and changed it to say, avoid situations which personal interests might be advanced at the expense of Jefferson Madison Regional Library instead of whatever the ALA one said, which was probably the library.
Which is also really in the public employee one also.
Yeah. I mean, there is some very library stuff in here, about like, this wouldn't necessarily be in the public employees handbook.
But is it okay to just say, we follow the ALA statement on professional ethics? Then you have no control over what ALA puts in there. I mean, not that anything bad, but then the board is saying like, we're endorsing this, then you have to review it periodically to make sure you still endorse it, or is it?
I mean,
just
it would
okay
be
to go?
reviewed.
Yeah. They have a new code of ethics principle on racial and social justice.
Yeah, it would be reviewed every 10 years with the policy, which is kind of where we are right now. We're reviewing it because it's one of our
Ninth
policies.
principle on
So
racial
instead of
justice.
reviewing whatever we wrote, we would go and look at whatever ALA currently had going, if that was.
Well, to the extent that that would be an approach, now is the time,
Right.
now is the
Yeah.
10-year time.
So it wouldn't be for another 10 years, basically.
Yeah.
For this. Because I could see ending up with just one code of ethics in which one of the ethics is we follow the American Library Association's code of ethics.
How long is theirs? Like, is someone actually gonna go read that?
It's nine bullet points.
Okay.
It was
The bullets
Yeah,
are more wordy than ours, but
okay, so we've got an action on the public employees code of ethics. What do we want to do?
well, so I'm still starting at the beginning. Do other libraries adopt?
I can do that. That's an action for me. I can go find that out.
Do we, regardless, even if no one else does it, do we want to do it? And if we do, then I think we would have a review of what's there and decide that for this 10 years, we can either adopt it wholesale, or we need to adapt, as we've done in the past. I think those are the questions as I see them.
Okay,
Um,
so I guess we're talking about that in 2 months.
well, I don't know. Can we make any progress on those questions right this minute?
Well, not about what do other libraries do that.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, that this is the place where we would always go and turn for professional ethics for libraries. Like there is no, that's it. That's the National Professional Association. And I would think that the more I think about it, adding a bullet to having one code of JMRL code of ethics and adopting what we think is important from the city's personnel manuals and then linking to or listing or linking to the ALA's ones would make sense. That would give the board a chance every 10 years to review. I'm sure they would want to discuss now.
Okay, well, so there needs to be a step of reviewing what's there now. And I've sort of, David knows I've done a little bit of that, and Chris is doing it right now. It's sort of the skin. Do we want to come back with a report next time, or recommendations, or? I mean, I will say that I'm not. I think I think that not everything in the June 2021 version is consistent with JMRL's mission values. So in case of conflict, that's we go back to is what controls. So, all right, it sounds like we'll just, people can review those source documents in the meantime, and that's where we need to kind of start back up in
Okay. So the takeaway, so Camille's going to work on the one end. I'll reach out to other libraries about what's going on there, and right.
Okay, yes. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
For the meeting.